Is there anything that atheists and Christians can agree on? Like, is it possible for an atheist to uphold the same values without believing in God?
You would have to explain, where does he derive those values from? So yes, we can share common values, but what's the origin and the source of those values? So when you ask me, of course it's possible, but that's because atheists do not live in a vacuum. As I told you last time, atheists are made, they're not born. No one's born an atheist. There's no such thing. That's why you can go to remote villages in the world, people who do not have, let's say, internet, no interaction with the world outside, and they all have a word for God, because creation testifies to design. This is the argument from Psalm chapter 19, verses 1 to 6, Psalm 19, verse 1 to 6, as well as from Romans 1, verses 18 to 32, where we're told that creation is one of God's ways of moving people, convicting people to come to the realization that there is an origin behind all of this. Here, let me show you. So, going back to him, he wasn't raised in a vacuum. He was either raised in a Christian home or in a Christian society or whatever it is. And so he inherits those values. So can we share common values? Yes. But what are they grounded in? For example, why does an atheist want to do good and be kind and compassionate and considerate? What would be the reason? What would be the motive? And what is the origin, the foundation of those ethical values?
That makes a lot of sense.
Psalm 19, verses 1 to 6. Here you go. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There's no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. So what it's saying is, creation speaks universal language. All cultures everywhere have access to creation. They see, in other words, they see the sun and the moon. They see the rotation, right? The sun rises, sets. The moon rises, sets, according from their perspective, what they call phenomenological language. I have a lisp, or save me from my lisp. Meaning everyday phenomenon. From our vantage point, the sun rises and sets. So we're looking at it from their vantage point, the sun rises and sets, and they see it's a constant. They know that tomorrow the sun will shine again. Why do they know that? Because they see, right, uniformity. They see consistency. They see that every day sun rises and sets, moon shines, right? So they expect this uniformity, but then you have to account for the uniformity. Why is it that I'm certain that tomorrow when I wake up, the sun will rise? What is governing creation that will ensure that the phenomenon I observe remains constant, doesn't change, so that tomorrow I don't have to be afraid the sun won't rise, or that I won't have gravity grounding me and I'll float into outer space? How do you explain this uniformity? How do you explain this constant, that there are constants in creation? And then this is what the psalm is saying. This is the language that everyone understands. Sun and moon, stars, 4 seasons. How do we know that the seasons are constant, and that when winter comes, it won't be as hot as it was in summer? And then when summer comes, it won't be as cold as it was in winter. What accounts for this uniformity? What accounts for this consistency? This is God telling people, think more deeply. Think, meditate, explain this complexity. Explain flowers and roses, and explain the variety of trees and fruits and vegetables. Explain the oceans and the complexity of marine life. Explain the complexity of animals and insects. And how do you explain this? Because we see design, right? We see intricate details. We see mechanisms that even with our best technology today, we can't duplicate. How do you account for this? This is God's way of getting our attention. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has set a tent for the sun, which comes out like a bridegroom leaving his chamber And like a strong man runs its course with joy, its rising is from the end of the heavens, and its circuit to the end of them. There's nothing hidden from its heat. So how do you account for this? So God is saying, pay attention, focus, look at the design and creation, look at its uniformity, look at its constants, look at its complexity, and explain this. What can account for this? An explosion, Big Bang, natural selection, processes that unfold throughout time that are unaided, unguided by an intellectual mind. See, atheists are made, they're not born. It's just instinctive. See?
Yeah. That's interesting. Like, so to sum it up, you could essentially say that creation itself is almost sentient in how intelligent it is.
Well, creation has been created by an intelligent designer, Lord save me from my list, an intelligent mind where he has designed creation with such beauty, depth, complexity that you see it's an intelligent creation, meaning whoever created it was wise, whoever created it had intelligence. To be able to create in such a way, to have this consistency, uniformity, and such complexity and complex organisms. So it's not that it's sentient. A sentient being designed it in such a way where you cannot help but reflect on the fact that whoever's behind this, it's not an it, it has to be a he. Some personal being with a mind. To give you a very poor analogy, if you walk in the desert and you see a home and it's built well and it's furnished and you see inside it has a table and has a kitchen and has an air conditioning unit, the last thing you're going to say is that an explosion took place and through some natural processes, right, it then formed into this complex home with all the necessary furnishings to survive in the desert. Right?
That would be a bit crazy.
And yet atheists want us to believe this vast universe that they say there are billions of galaxies, billions of stars, and this happened because of the Big Bang, and over billions of years, as this explosion from a microscopic point expanded, in this expansion, planets form, stars form, just by natural processes. And then we arrive at Earth from an amoeba or from a rock where they say, I don't know how many years that you just had lightning hitting this rock and boom, it could produce proteins and amino acids. And from the ocean, you got a creature that comes, walks on this Earth, and then it evolves into all these complex creatures that we see on Earth. Now, the question is, how did this creature that lived in the water, how did it manage to come out of the water and still survive on dry ground? Because obviously, if you take a fish out of water, it dies because it's designed to be able to live in water. Take it out of water, it can't live. And if you were to throw yourself in the ocean, you're eventually drowned if you don't come out of the water. So, but this creature that comes out of the water was able to survive in the water and then survive outside the water and then evolve into all these complex life forms. That's a great fairy tale, if you ask me.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me.
But there's atheists and scientists that swear by it.
I know. Like, as I was studying the Bible years ago, I used to study evolution and science and stuff. I loved it because it was fun, I guess. It was fun.
By the way,
So
evolution, I just want to let you know, evolution is not disproof of God. Evolution itself, if you believe the processes and how things evolve, evolution itself requires a miracle. But the reason why Christians I got to be careful because there are Christians who try to reinterpret the Bible to agree with macroevolution. But let's say we didn't have the Genesis account, Genesis chapters 1 to 11. Let's say we didn't have the Genesis account of creation. Evolution would be one of the strongest proofs for an intelligent mind, because if you believe evolution and its story, how things evolved and became complex, you know that this in itself is a miracle if we follow the storyline, that there has to be a power and a mind behind it to guide the processes of evolution in such a way that now you have the evolution rising to man. So you go from simple cells, right? You go from an amoeba, and then it evolves in the ocean, and boom, comes out of the ocean, and then it starts evolving to then you get the crown of creation, humanity, even though they don't think that. But you get my point?
Yeah.
Evolution itself would be an evidence for an intelligent, powerful mind, but we don't accept it because of Genesis chapter 1:11, which we take to be history, and we then take the theory of macroevolution as an attempt to destroy faith in the Bible. But if the Bible didn't say anything about the origin of the universe, Christians would be jumping on evolution as proof of an intelligent, powerful mind. And there are some Christians who actually use evolution to prove the existence of an intelligent, personal creator God who revealed himself in Jesus Christ. They're called theistic evolutionists.
Oh, yeah, like the young earth creationists and older.
No, they will not be theistic evolutionists. Young earth creationists say they believe the Bible, Genesis 1:11 is history, so they try to marshal scientific facts destroying the theory of macroevolution. It would be more like William Lane Craig, theistic evolutionists, that say that Genesis 1 to 11 is not straight up history, it's mytho-history, so that you don't have to be committed to believing that God created the universe the way Genesis 1 details and outlines, because it wasn't meant to be history. It was more like a polemic or mytho-history, so that you can then be free to explore evolution and use that as proof for the personal creator God revealed in Jesus Christ.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes a whole lot more
Which
sense.
I don't believe anyway. I don't accept that. But nonetheless, but we went far adrift. Yes, to answer the question, the shared values, but where does he get his values from? He gets it from his cultural background that's steeped in religion. So depending on the background, if he's a Hindu, he's going to get his values from Hinduism. If he's a Buddhist, he's going to get it from Buddhism. If it's Muslim, etc., etc. So you get the point.
Yeah.
All right. So what's his next question?
Next question is, why do people turn to atheism as opposed to like any other belief system?
Well, you mean those who become atheists? Because there are people who do turn to other religious systems. So you have Christians who become Muslims, Muslims who become Christians. So does he mean, why do people become atheists?
I think that's what he means. Like,
yeah.
Why do people choose that over something else?
If you actually examine and investigate the testimonies of many atheists, and this is not true for everyone. So I'm just giving you a general principle. This is not true in every specific situation. So typically, a person becomes an atheist because he cannot reconcile the pain and suffering and misery of the world with a God who's all powerful and all good. So that drives them to atheism. So if you ask me now, this is generally true. This is what we would call a general truth. It's generally true, but it's not true in every specific situation. I'll give you an example. One of the most famous New Testament scholars who became an atheist is Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman will tell you he didn't become an atheist because he lost his faith in the inspiration of the Bible. He was a liberal Christian. He became an atheist because of the pain and suffering and evil in the world. Mm-hmm. And he struggled with, how can there be a good God who's all powerful and allows such evil and misery, suffering and pain, especially when it comes to children suffering. So that drove him to atheism. So that's generally the case. Others who become atheists may end up becoming so because they lose faith in a particular religious text. For example, there are Christians who have been taught the wrong view of the Bible and its inspiration. And when someone puts holes in the Bible and tries to show, well, there are variant readings and alleged contradictions, then their entire faith in the Bible shatters, and they go, well, if the Bible isn't true, then God must not exist, and therefore there's no God. So that's another reason. But typically, generally, you'll find that atheists end up becoming atheists because of evil and suffering. In fact, there is a book written, The Faith of the Fatherless. Now, I have the book. I didn't read the book. It was recommended by David Wood. He read it. This is a book that if you're interested in the psychology of atheists, this author examined the lives of some of the world's most famous atheists, like Nietzsche and others, and he found that one common factor among them is that they either had abusive fathers or absentee fathers, and because their fathers abused them or were not there and abandoned them, that led them to hate God because God is a father figure.
That one makes sense, yeah.
Yeah. Well, said generally, an atheist becomes an atheist because of pain and suffering and misery. So what would make him believe? You'd have to solve the tension between the belief in a personal God who's good and the evil and misery and suffering in the world. So in those situations, you would have to show them that a good God exists and that the existence of a good God who's all-powerful is not incompatible with suffering, with evil and misery. And then you'd have to go into the issue of theodicy, which is very not hard to understand, but it requires in-depth discussion that will take more than 5 minutes. Or if there's an atheist who became an atheist because he lost his faith in the Bible and thinking, well, if the Bible is not true, then it's not a revelation of God. And if it's not a revelation of God, then that means maybe there is no God. Because a lot of atheists are actually agnostics. What do I mean? They'll tell you, well, I don't believe in God, but I'm not certain whether God doesn't exist. I just don't find any arguments convincing enough that God exists.
Yeah, I think that's more him.
All right, well, if he's open then, so you're not shut off from the possibility a God exists, so that because of lack of evidence, you say, I believe there's no God, but I'm not absolutely certain there's no God, and I'm willing to hear a good case for God, well, then you're going to have to give him the evidence for that God. For example, even when an atheist tells you, why is there so much evil and suffering, that actually proves the Bible. What do I mean? When a person is grieved and broken to see so much misery and pain, when a person is angry, depressed over human suffering and misery, children dying of cancer or starving, or people murdering people, that's actually a testimony that God has written his law in their hearts, because the Bible says we're created in the image of God, and having that image of God in us that's not effaced, we then, whether we want to admit it or not, react to injustices and immorality, which assumes there is morality that is beyond us that's objectively true. Because if atheism is true, then morality is relative. There is no such thing as moral absolutes. And if there's no such thing as moral absolutes, then all you're telling me is your own subjective feelings. Well, I don't like this. I think it's bad. Well, good for you. But you're not God. You're not a prophet. So who cares what you like and dislike? You don't determine moral absolutes. So even in getting angry at evil, getting depressed at misery and suffering, in a weird way, that indirectly testifies the person is aware that evil does exist and good does exist. And when there is an infraction of good, an absence of good, that person decries that because he cries for justice. Well, where did that come from?
Those are some very brilliant observations, honestly.
Well, I'm not the first one to come up with it. Brilliant Christian minds, philosophical minds, already addressed these arguments for thousands of years. The literature is there. I'm a neophyte when it comes to this. And where do you find the basis for what I just said? That when your friend gets upset at evil and decries injustices, he's actually testifying that he knows instinctively that moral absolutes do exist, so that raping a child is objectively evil, right? Or taking advantage of the poor is objectively evil. He is arguing for the fact that the lawgiver has written his law in his heart, though he denies his existence. And where does it come from? Romans 2, 14 and 15. Romans 2, 14 and 15. Let me show you. C.S. Lewis was one of the greatest Christian minds of the 20th century. For when Gentiles who do not have the law, meaning the law revealed to him like God revealed it on Mount Sinai. You know the Old Testament? God comes down, reveals it. And Israel saw the pillar of cloud by day, pillar of fire by night, right? And heard God's voice audibly. Well, that God didn't do for everyone. So when they do not have the law revealed to them that way, but by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them. There it is right there, you see?
Wow.
Romans 2, 14, 15.
That's crazy, because I've read Romans, I've read basically all the books, but the word is so alive that it's just you're always learning.
Because it's the voice of God, and God is the living God and the source of life, so his word is living and active.
Amen.
So once he says this is evil, I'll go, thank you for presupposing God exists and moral absolutes exist. Why? Because if everything is relative and all we are more evolved animals, or like the late Greg Bonson would say, molecules in motion, who cares what one animal does to another? There is no morality that governs the animal kingdom, right? When a lion tears up its prey, you don't say the lion is being evil. The lion just doing what evolution, right, caused.
In that way, like by an atheist perspective, everything is right.
From an atheist perspective, it's amoral, not immoral. Amoral means there is no morality. So to say something is right or wrong assumes that you have an objective standard for right and wrong. Otherwise, it is amoral. In fact, hardcore materialist atheists will tell you that even your actions and your words are already governed by chemical reactions in your brain. So your brain is causing you to feel a certain way, say a certain thing, and act a certain way, so that you don't have free will. That's actually within atheism. You have hardcore materialist atheists that say you don't have free will, because everything is governed by brain activity and chemical reactions, which means if they were to take this to its logical conclusion, when a rapist rapes, he's doing it because he's being compelled to by his brain. He has no choice. So why is he morally accountable?
No one really wants to talk about that.
But it's true. I'm not lying. They're out there.
I know.
Materialist, naturalistic atheists who are hardcore materialists and admit, yeah, you're not making choice. You think you're making a choice because even that's been programmed by your brain. So your brain has programmed to think you're making choices, but it's all chemical reaction. Even love is a chemical reaction. They'll tell you get the same chemical stimulus, right, from eating chocolate. So even if he argues about morality, he's assuming God exists, and you know moral absolutes exist because that moral God has made known his moral standard, even though you deny his existence. So when you react against injustices, you're testifying you bear his image, though it's been tainted by sin.